Hello and welcome to COVID-19 Today, a new program we're launching to bring you daily updates on local impacts due to the coronavirus public health crisis. Welcome to our special week looking back on COVID-19 Today. I'm Jen Chun. Thanks so much for joining us. What you just saw was the beginning of what would be a 2-year journey. That first episode of COVID-19 Today launched 2 years ago this week. It's hard to believe that we've aired hundreds of live broadcasts since, with so much to report each day. A state of emergency was declared, and Los Angeles County released the first of many health officer orders. That first one shutting down most non-essential businesses to the public. The city pivoted to respond by informing the public that all programs here at the Civic Center were temporarily canceled. Youth sports, fitness facilities, just about anywhere but the supermarkets were forced to halt their operations as health officials assessed the severity of the novel coronavirus, something that was rapidly spreading throughout Los Angeles County and around the world. It was something none of us had imagined or ever experienced. Now, as city employees and members of the media, all of us here at City Cable were deemed essential workers. So we got to work. All of our normal programming came to a standstill as we started to develop a new show that would address the newly developing health crisis. We gathered a crew and produced a live news show every day at 4 p.m. And as the pandemic first slowed down, we scaled back to a Monday through Thursday program, still providing live updates 4 days a week. We've helped share the message of the California Department of Public Health, the Governor's Office, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, as well as executive orders from the city of Torrance. And here we are, 2 years and more than 450 shows later. So as we wrap up this last week of COVID-19 Today, we're taking this time to reflect on how the city of Torrance responded to the crisis, how the community came together, and how an emergency brought out the best in all of us. This 4-part series includes candid conversations with city leaders and staff who played key roles during this emergency. Let's take a look at what it was like in Torrance at the start of the pandemic. Here's Lesley Robins to kick off this week's special COVID-19 Reflections.
Thank you so much, Jen. You know, I too remember like it was yesterday, the flurry of emails about the county shutting down, our city canceling programs, new signs posted at public counters. It was a confusing and scary time, and the city of Torrance seamlessly took action to respond to this health crisis. They took measures to ensure Torrance residents were safe, employees were safe, and the business community would have the city's full support through every stage of this pandemic. Our special guest today was at the helm of the city as Torrance's longest tenured city manager, Mr. LeRoy Jackson. It is such a privilege and honor to get this one-on-one time with you. Your institutional knowledge of all things Torrance is unmatched, and we are so excited to have you in the chair.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Now, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic on March 12, 2020. Where were you at that exact moment, and what were your initial thoughts?
I don't know if I know the exact moment. I saw it on the news, read it in the papers. We were aware that something was happening. We didn't have a definition of what it was or how it was going to be approached at that point in time. So it's probably moving into the workday.
Well, after more than 50 years in total working for the city, did you ever experience anything like COVID-19?
No, we've had emergencies from riots to fires to floods. They come up very instantly. You move into it, you resolve it, and you move on. COVID was a ramp-up situation. From the first days, we really began to play with what this meant to us. Our general services department moved out to secure our physical property. to make sure that we had sanitation wipe downs, and we secured the entrances to the buildings, that people paid attention to the possibility of there being a flu situation there.
Like you just mentioned, the city acted quickly, temporarily pausing many programs and services for the public to ensure the safety of our employees and the public in general, while also making sure that key essential services resumed. How did those conversations start, and how did you feel having to make some really big decisions?
Well, I don't make all of the decisions. I gathered together our executive team. We met over in the assembly room where we could keep distance and wipe down capabilities. We set up a virtual emergency operations center, the first time we've ever done that, because we couldn't meet close up together as such, which is what the emergency operations center is all set up to do. And the team, all my department heads, began to weigh what we would be doing over the next week, we thought, or 2 weeks at the most. And we met every day to go over what was happening and to evaluate how we were going to approach it.
You mentioned 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Who would have thought it would last almost 2 years?
Yes, we never had a perception of that in the beginning.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes, yes.
Well, during the month of March, the city began offering new services such as Torrance Cares to Go to deliver groceries and whatnot to Torrance seniors and residents with disabilities and underlying health conditions. Can you tell me about our city's safer at home efforts that came about during this time?
Well, we have two parts to that. We ended up stopping a lot of programs. You have an awful lot of bus operators who are not driving buses. You have individuals who are doing rec classes that are not doing rec classes, and library personnel who are not doing library. But they're still on payroll. They're still here. They're part of our family as such. So we moved into finding good programs that would aid the community in this situation and combine the personnel with the programs to carry it out. We thought that seniors especially would be trapped in their homes, not allowed to go out, and it was effective to have a reach out program for them. The food services was tied into a problem we ran into very early in the situation. The grocery stores and the major supply areas couldn't handle the number of people that were coming and control the crowds. They had to quickly come up with a lineup situation, something new for them. It became hard for people to get food or to run out and grab food. And so we filled that in with our delivery system for the seniors.
Well, we declared a local emergency. So how do you think that affected residents?
Well, you had to declare a local emergency. While there is one for the feds, the state, and the county, it's important that the city ask the governor to concur with our declaration of an emergency for funding, in part, to be reimbursed for all the activities we're involved in, and also to set a clarification of local situations that we had. We had to close down our parks. We had to close down the beaches. We had to close down quite a few facilities, and those aren't just automatic things. The declaration gave the city manager the authority to carry those out, subject to the concurrence of the council at their next meeting.
Well, as a city manager, you serve essentially as the CEO of the city of Torrance. So tell me, what kind of funding, as you were just talking about, did the city receive that helped keep it afloat?
We received no funding. When we started the emergency, we were on our own. And that's true with any emergency. It's going to be several weeks before the federal government and the state can come back and help you. So you're really out there on your own, using your resources as you best can. Again, we had the employees as a resource available. We were paying them anyway. We had the funding that came from our budget to feed that operation. But we received no external funding until almost a year later.
Well, then what were your biggest fears going into that?
Biggest fears was the inequity of the decisions early made. Essential businesses versus non-essential became a major hassle within the community. First defining them, then getting the word out and enforcing them. The mask situation created problems because we were not able to provide masks. We had a lot of businesses and community groups that donated masks to us, which helped a great deal. We were supposed to do, we tried helping on testing and other things, but the county was also up against a wall trying to provide these services. So it was a scramble to keep up with the ever-changing terrain during those first couple of months.
Well, speaking of masks, how did that movement affect our senior residents in Torrance? Because they're some of our most vulnerable.
Getting the masks, getting them to understand why the masks were there, really they took the lead themselves. They wanted to be safe and secure. They couldn't get out. We, as many other areas in the community, suffered seriously in senior care facilities. And those were devastating in that we had losses in those facilities. And we were outside coming in to try helping them and change the dynamics of what was going on.
You mentioned the word help. The fire department helped immensely in that area, too.
They did as we moved down the road. In the early days, we couldn't get a handle from the county as to where instances were happening. They were rather cautious on giving out medical information to the public as such, and that made it very difficult to respond to the needs that were out there.
Well, during all of this, we were just on the heels of the cyber incident when the pandemic hit. So we went from cyber, COVID, and then civil unrest in those first 6 months in 2020. So tell me, what was going through your mind during all of that?
Well, the cyber incident was a good dress rehearsal to a certain extent.
That's a good way to put it.
We moved very quickly to handle a situation that was outside of our scope of thinking. We lost our email, we lost our web page, we lost a lot of communication abilities that we were able to adjust and respond to. So I think that learning from that really, and it's amazing, just a couple of months ahead, really prepared us for the next step. It's good that we had the cyber resolved, or fairly well resolved, by the time we entered this second set of incidences. The civil unrest incident was more of a normal emergency, if there's anything like a normal emergency, because it hit, you set yourself up to respond, you respond, and then you bring it down. The cyber, this incident has been a response, and we keep it up, and we never settle down. We're not in a recovery mode, which is normal in an emergency. Until now, we're getting to the point of really recovery.
As a human being, how did your mind even process what was going on?
Well, it's processed in a whole variety of things. I'm family. I have 6 kids and grandkids, so talking to them and following them up. I had an aunt who was in a senior facility in Omaha. She didn't see her grandkids for almost a year and a half. We had, I mentioned earlier, I have teachers, I have principals.
In your family?
In my family, who all were responding and dealing with this situation themselves. I have a county special investigator as a son who was responding at the county level. All of these were shifting, and it was interesting hearing from them because we could adjust and share as well.
So coming to and from work all of that time, what did you observe happening around you in the city?
You observed the grocery stores again, the lines, the lack of understanding of what people really needed as compared to what they want. So the shelves were empty. Grocery shopping was a challenge, as it was. You learned new ways of shopping. The lineup for the cash register was most interesting. Our city issued the first guidelines for masks of drive-throughs. Because one of our council members had a concern about drive-throughs. They thought both for the customer and for the individual, they're up close and personal. And so after issuing my order and kind of thinking, okay, I drive through a drive-through and the guy's not wearing a mask. And you ask him, and he says, well, we haven't heard anything about that. And I loaned him a mask and told him to talk to his boss. But even those sorts of communications matters were slow in getting out. You can make an order, but you can't make it happen.
Speaking of the word order, with every health order, the city had to adjust constantly. So how did you and your team respond to that?
Well, again, we had the virtual EOC. Originally, we met in person, then we moved further and further apart. But every day we'd go through what is a standard emergency review process handled by our fire chief. And you'd look back your 24, you'd look at your present, and you'd identify what you were going to do in the coming 24. That kept you focused and kept you going as you went through the emergency.
I want to go back to what you said about grocery shopping. Did you do your own grocery shopping at that time, and did people stop you wanting answers because they see you and they think you have all the answers?
No, I suspect council members did. Council members cannot escape. I tend to escape that, but my neighbors would ask and other things because I live in the community, so I'd get that sort of feedback. And my family, I'm the Google for my family, so they're asking me what they can do and what they can't do. Had lots of queries that way.
Through the pandemic, do you think it allowed the various departments in the city of Torrance to almost step up their game and present themselves in a new light?
Very much. I do think that. We adjusted very quickly from field operations to our openings for our main facility at our one stop, whether we would open or close or would we operate virtually. Every department had to make adjustments and to really ponder where they were going. You know, it's from the silliest to a certain extent. We'd take down basketball hoops in all the parks because people had nothing to do. They'd go to our parks. We had to discourage games and other things. So the nets and the basketball hoops had to come down. Those were new ideas for our recreation community services. We were on a farmer's market. We were the only farmer's market that came back. We only lost 1 week. Came back the next week with a plan of action, ran it by the county health. They weren't comfortable, but they let us move. And then they looked at it, and it became the pattern for the county as a whole. And other farmer markets that came up were shut down because they didn't follow the patterns and the directions that we'd established.
And then council meetings then went virtual during all of this. How did that make you feel?
They did. Well, it was very different. It was a challenge because you're taking 7 individuals and trying to bring them up online. The technical characteristics of that is rather challenging. Nobody before this knew what Zoom was. So you're into Zoom, encouraging them to come to the city hall, not because it was the place where the council meeting was held, but was where we could provide technical assistance for the first several weeks, was challenging because they didn't want to leave their homes. They didn't want to mingle or what have you. But they were very, very conscious of their need and responsibility, and we walked through it. The call-in or the capability of handling call-ins was a whole new era for us and came up very swiftly and worked, which was the surprise for everybody. And lighting, you don't think about it, but council members lighting. Some of them backlighted and they didn't have a face. Others reflected off the window and were washed out by the brightness. Just even learning to mute is a major task for all of us that we've now come to know and understand. So those were challenging efforts as it was.
So you're talking about Zoom. There are so many Torrance residents that were not technologically savvy. So how did Torrance help those residents?
Well, I think the school district did.
Yeah.
A lot of them were learning very quickly Zoom because their kids were on it and they were appreciative of that and they picked it up rather quickly. It's still awkward We didn't have them on picture when they were coming from home, so it didn't have that much effect. They were only phone orientation. Council members to council members, us to regional groups. South Bay city managers met virtually. The county met virtually. The Emergency Operations Center was virtual. So we were picking up Zoom all day long. It was an 8-hour effort.
Unlike the cyber incident and COVID, which did not overlap, we had COVID and then civil unrest just blended together. So how were our departments and resources just stretched to the limit at that time?
It was a stretching. We had to really lead into the civil unrest. It wasn't an immediate situation here, but it had happened in Long Beach, Santa Monica, and other areas where there were malls and shopping areas. So we had a concern that we might be next or right on the edge of having it happen here. So it was setting up a plan of action, which drew in the police, and strangely, the police were not a major resource in the COVID situation. They were readjusting. We went from 2-man cars to 1-officer cars. We closed our front doors as other places in the operations, but PD to a certain extent had pulled back. So this was a resource available for that end. Our Public Works Department, fire, transit all involved themselves in hardening our mall to make it less accessible. We have so many entrances to the mall, it's kind of scary from an emergency standpoint, but we were able to harden it up and prepare, and it became a non-event to a large degree because of the preparation and the step out that was taken.
So let's fast forward a few months. During all of this, you announced your retirement, effective September 30th, 2020.
Yes.
So what were the reactions of fellow employees, residents, all of them?
Well, to a certain extent, we thought we'd be done again by September. So my timing was such that we'd completed all of these and I was moving out. But the reaction was from the mayor and council a surprise. I think it always is for retirements when they come up. The period of time that I'd allowed was somewhat short because it is not wise to be hanging on as kind of a lame duck after you've made your announcement. My team was understanding, most of my gang department heads as such, and I had a good team to step in. I had good city manager staff. I had a good assistant city manager, and the council was mature enough and capable enough to make decisions too, because it's not easy. I think, as the mayor mentioned in his State of the City, he's one of very few mayors who've been involved in the decision of appointing a city manager. So you have to have the experience, the background to do that as well. And it was a timing that fit at that moment.
Well, how does retirement fit you?
It fits me well. I am involved with my own personal history, family history, and other things that I'm working on, projects that I set aside and are now getting back to. When you have 13 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren, there's a busy time on that as well. So it's been nice. You miss the family that is the city of Torrance, because we are a family, always have been. You miss the intensity of actions at times. Emergencies are scary, but they're also very involved. Your adrenaline's going, and you miss those opportunities, but it's still good.
Well, you have a big smile on your face. Does it make you smile even more to know that you've left the city in good hands?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm not broken away entirely. I spend Tuesday nights watching council meetings.
You do?
Yes.
There you go.
And I catch the feel and the flavor of things that are happening, and am very proud of our city and what it's doing in these days.
Well, what are you most proud of during your time at the helm?
I think the organization. Uh, I could talk about a lot of events or things that happen, but if it wasn't for the organization, they wouldn't have happened. So I'm proud of being able to work with a multitude of councils, with a multitude of department heads, with a multitude of managers, and with an ever-present committed team of employees to serve our community.
Well, of course, Torrance was not just a workplace for you, it is also your hometown.
It is.
This past year and a half, you have observed the city's response to the pandemic during all of the surges. So, what was your reaction as a resident versus an employee?
I think very positive. A little concern with how long it took on the masks question, and not so strong on how long, but the uncomfortableness of knowing what the rules are. And I watch when I enter a place, if they're wearing masks, I wear masks. I still use it for drive-throughs. But the untidiness of our new life is still untidy, and I would like it to get more tidy as it goes.
Well, in your new life as a retiree, what's it like watching the city adapt?
Um, it's not much different. I just don't have control of it.
Is that okay for you?
It's okay. Yeah. I used to have all of these. I'd have my kids, I'd have neighbors who'd give me feedback, and it would be there'd be graffiti here or there'd be problems there, and I'd have to follow up on it. Now I can see the things, and I can poke somebody, and I have to follow up on it.
So, were you ever really able to leave your work at the workplace, or you always had to take it home?
And Ram and I have talked about this. You are 724. There's no, especially with the coming of the cell phone. Before cell phones, it was a little distance, but with cell phones, you're always reachable, and you will be reached.
And are people still reaching out for you for your advice?
No, I'm very pleased with that. My team knows what they're to do, and they don't need me piddling around or fooling around with their operations as such. I think that I'm the Google of the city historically and otherwise. So people tag me for who is this, what was that, how things happened. I get a lot of that.
That's a lovely honor to have, right?
Well, I guess so. It's partially memory, so it's DNA, and then it's partially somebody who loves history and has read a lot and studied a lot.
Well, I've wondered if there's a newfound appreciation for preparedness coming out of all of this. I think while no one can really prepare you for something of this magnitude, as a city, we've definitely gained so much knowledge. So, navigating out of an emergency, what do you think the city learned from everything that we have gone through?
We didn't have a plan for a pandemic, and so our emergency operation plan will definitely have a plan for a pandemic. But that doesn't lead you into what might happen that you don't have a plan for. So it's probably that the emergency operations will be more flexible, more able to respond to the unusual. I think we've learned a lot of that, and we've learned how to deal with long-term emergencies. Hopefully we don't have many of those, but a long-term emergency would be something we'd be much more prepared for.
What did you personally learn through all of it?
I think I've learned a whole different world of interaction. I've learned that meeting personally has importance. That when you go Zoom over an extended period of time, you lose a lot of the personal contacts. You lose the subtleties of communications. And there's no real workaround on that. There's adjustments. My teacher children say it's really amazing how students have learned that they can look like they're active at home and be doing other things in other places. But a good indication of some of the problems that we've learned about and have to really work at is kids returning to school don't know how to socialize. They've lost that ability. They go out in the playground, they don't know how to play because they haven't played. There's just this peculiar, or they leave the classroom because they could leave where they were. They walk out to go to the restroom or something else, and the teacher looks up and they aren't there because they have a different type of independence than what they used to have. So it's required some real adjustments to who we are and what we will be.
Well, I think who you were and who you are is remarkable. And I thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of your knowledge from your time with Torrance and especially during the pandemic.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
And thank you to everyone at home for tuning in today. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow as Rhiannon Trutanich sits down with Torrance Fire Department's Assistant Chief, Kevin Milliken, who shares with us his stories of our first responders who pivoted to assist the community on so many levels. Please be safe, stay healthy, and thank you for tuning in. We will see you next time.